It started on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when the lake outside my house looked like glass and the air smelled clean. I had owned this property for almost 10 years, and that lake was the reason I bought it in the first place. My father and I used to fish there every summer. The water had always been clear, the reflection so pure you could see the clouds drifting in it like they belonged there. That morning, though, something was off. The water had turned murky, a strange film floating on top. The smell hit me next, a sharp, chemical stench that didn't belong anywhere near a lake. My dog, Scout, came running down the dock and stopped, nose twitching, whining softly. Even he knew something was wrong. I crouched near the edge and dipped a stick into the water. When I pulled it back out, it came up slick with some oily residue. I didn't need to be a scientist to know this wasn't natural. Across the water, I saw them, 2 HOA maintenance trucks parked behind the clubhouse. A group of men in neon vests were dumping something from large plastic barrels into the drainage ditch that ran directly into my lake. For a moment, I thought I must be seeing things. But then one of the barrels tipped, spilling its contents straight into the runoff. The liquid shimmered in the sunlight before disappearing into the stream. I grabbed my phone and started recording. When I walked over there, my blood was boiling. The air reeked even worse up close, and one of the workers turned toward me with that look of fake concern. Behind him stood Karen, the HOA president, arms folded, sunglasses on, her mouth pulled tight into that condescending smile she always wore. "Can I help you, Mr. Green?" she asked, her tone drenched in mock sweetness. "What the hell are you pouring into my lake?" I demanded. She glanced at the barrels. "Oh, that? Just some runoff treatment. Harmless. We're maintaining the property according to HOA standards." Harmless. I held up my phone, still recording. "That's not what it smells like." Karen's smile faltered for half a second. Then she stepped closer. "I suggest you put that phone down. You signed the HOA agreement, remember? You have no authority over maintenance operations." "This isn't maintenance," I said quietly. "This is contamination." Her expression hardened. "Watch your tone, Mr. Green. We have procedures. You can file a complaint, but you might want to check your own compliance first. I noticed your dock hasn't been repainted this year. That's a violation." Typical Karen. Turning it back around, trying to assert control. I didn't bother arguing. I just walked away, still filming as they hurried to load the barrels back onto the truck. By evening, the lake looked worse. The once clear water had turned an ugly greenish gray. The fish were gone, and the frogs that used to croak at sunset had gone silent. I stood on the dock with a pit in my stomach. That's when I made my first call to the county environmental office. They logged my complaint, took my statement, and said they'd look into it. But I knew how these things went. HOA boards had money, connections, and layers of bureaucracy to hide behind. So I made another call to someone I knew personally. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of engines. The HOA trucks were back, and Karen was standing beside them in her sun hat and clipboard, directing her little army of maintenance workers like a general. They were fencing off part of the lake now, claiming it was for restoration. I stepped outside. She saw me and smiled again. "Good morning. Just so you know, access to this part of the lake is temporarily restricted. HOA safety protocols. On my property?" I asked. "Technically, the lake is shared space," she said smoothly. "We manage it for everyone's benefit. You should really be thanking us." "You mean thanking you for poisoning it?" Her jaw tightened. "I think you should be careful with your accusations." That was the last straw. 2 days later, a white government SUV pulled into the neighborhood. The logo on the side read, Environmental Protection Agency. Karen was outside pruning her roses when they arrived. She straightened up, confused at first, then suspicious. The agents got out, clipboards in hand, wearing gloves and reflective vests. They walked straight past me and toward the clubhouse. Karen intercepted them halfway, already in full defensive mode. "Excuse me. This is private property," she snapped. One of the agents held up his ID. "Ma'am, we're responding to an environmental contamination report. We have federal authorization to inspect the premises." Karen blinked, her lips parting. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the show. They spent hours there, taking samples, photographing the barrels, tracing the runoff path straight into my lake. I watched Karen pace back and forth, trying to argue, then switching tactics to charm. Neither worked. By noon, they were talking to the HOA vice president, a nervous-looking man named Paul. He was sweating bullets, insisting he had no idea what was in those barrels. I knew better. Karen ran that HOA like a kingdom, and everyone else just nodded along. When the agents finally came over to my property line, they thanked me for the report and told me to stay away from the water until the tests were complete. Karen shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. Mr. Green, a low voice said. This is your HOA board. We need to discuss what you've done. I almost laughed. What I've done? You've caused unnecessary panic. Those were harmless treatments. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you've brought on this community? I think the trouble started when you dumped chemicals in a federally protected waterway, I said. Silence. Then the line went dead. The next day, I found a letter taped to my door. Official HOA letterhead. It accused me of defamation, property obstruction, and creating a hostile environment. It also fined me $500 for having a non-compliant mailbox. They were really reaching now. I sent a copy of the letter to the EPA investigator. An hour later, I got an email back that simply said, keep everything documented. Over the next week, tension in the neighborhood grew thicker than the chemical slick still floating on the lake. Some of the neighbors sided with me, quietly. Others whispered that I was overreacting, stirring up trouble. Karen, meanwhile, kept her chin high, pretending everything was under control. But I noticed her smile faltering more often. Her yard meetings grew smaller, her tone sharper. One evening, as the sun set over the still-tainted water, I saw a car pull up to her house. A man in a suit got out, holding a folder. They talked on the porch for a long time. Karen looked pale when he left. The following morning, the HOA trucks disappeared. The lake remained off-limits. Orange tape stretched across the dock like a scar. And then came the notice. Every homeowner in the community received an email from the HOA board. Emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Mandatory attendance, ***. I knew what that meant. Damage control. When I walked into the clubhouse, the air was heavy. Karen sat at the front table, hands clasped tightly, papers stacked before her. Paul looked like he hadn't slept in days. The residents filled the room, murmuring. Karen stood. We've received inquiries from federal authorities regarding recent maintenance operations, she began. Unfortunately, misinformation has been circulating, leading to unnecessary panic. A few people muttered. She pressed on. We acted within our rights and believed the products used were environmentally safe. There was no malicious intent. I raised my hand. So you admit to dumping chemicals into the lake? Her jaw twitched. I said we believed they were safe. You didn't answer the question. The room went quiet. Karen glared at me. Mr. Green, this is not a courtroom. No, I said, but it might become one. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She opened her mouth to fire back, but at that moment, her phone buzzed. She looked down, eyes widening. Her face drained of color. The HOA vice president leaned over. What is it? He whispered. She didn't answer. Slowly, she turned her screen toward him. I caught a glimpse of the notification banner. EPA report. Criminal investigation pending. The room erupted into whispers. Paul stood up abruptly, muttering something about needing to step outside. Karen just sat there, staring at the phone like it had betrayed her. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The story wasn't over, not even close. Because I knew this HOA, and I knew Karen. They wouldn't go down quietly. And I wasn't about to let them bury this under bureaucracy again. The meeting ended in chaos. People shouted, papers rustled, and Karen disappeared through the side door before anyone could corner her with more questions. I stayed seated for a few moments, watching the neighbors turn on each other. Whispers, blame, nervous laughter. It was the kind of mess that doesn't happen overnight, the kind that builds up under the surface until something finally cracks. When I walked out into the parking lot, the air felt heavy. The streetlights reflected off the lake's surface, the same lake that had once been alive with sound and color. Now it looked dead, silent, even the crickets avoiding the edge. Paul, the vice president, was standing near his car smoking a cigarette. When he saw me, he froze for a second, then nodded awkwardly. Rough night, I said. He exhaled slowly, the smoke drifting past his shaking hand. You have no idea. The EPA report. Karen told everyone it was just paperwork. Turns out it's criminal. They're already asking for financial records. Financial? I raised a brow. He looked around, lowering his voice. You didn't hear it from me, but some of those contracts, the ones for the landscaping, waste removal, they weren't legit. She's been funneling money through vendors nobody can trace. I stared at him. You realize that makes everyone on the board responsible. He crushed the cigarette under his shoe, eyes darting nervously. I didn't sign off on everything. I trusted her. I didn't say it out loud, but that was everyone's mistake. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No HOA trucks, no lawn crews, no emails about fines or community notices. Karen's house looked like a fortress. The curtains were always drawn. I figured she was either on the phone with her lawyer or pretending none of this was happening. Then, late one evening, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Headlights swept across my porch. When I opened the door, Paul was standing there, looking exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat in the kitchen. He kept glancing at the window like he expected someone to burst in. "She's planning something," he said finally. "Karen." He nodded. "She called an emergency board session. Not public, just the inner circle. She said we need to correct the narrative before the feds make their findings official." "And how exactly does she plan to do that?" He hesitated. "She wants to destroy the documents. All of it. Emails, invoices, payment records." I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. "So she's moving from negligence to obstruction. I can't stop her alone," he said quietly. "But if she does this, we're all done." I thought for a moment. "When's the meeting?" "Tomorrow. 8 sharp. Clubhouse." By the time he left, I had a plan forming in the back of my mind. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But if Karen thought she could rewrite the truth, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The next evening, I parked a block away from the clubhouse and walked through the shadows. The windows were lit, and I could hear muffled voices inside. Karen's sharp tone cutting through like a knife. "They're turning on us," she was saying. "The EPA doesn't care about facts. They just want a scapegoat. If we make this disappear, we control the story." I peeked through the blinds. She was pacing, her hair pulled tight, gestures sharp. Around the table sat 4 others from the board, including Paul, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. She slid a stack of folders toward them. "Sign the disposal order. We'll tell them the vendor handled the paperwork." "That's illegal," Paul muttered. Karen's eyes snapped toward him. "What isn't these days? You think they won't come for you too?" I took out my phone, recording again. The screen glowed faintly as I zoomed in. Every word she said was another nail in her coffin. Suddenly, she stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing toward the window. I ducked just in time. "Did someone just move outside?" she asked. "Probably nothing," someone said quickly. But Karen wasn't convinced. She stepped closer to the blinds. I held my breath as her shadow passed over me. Then, from across the street, a car door slammed. A neighbor getting home. The distraction worked. She turned away. I slipped back into the darkness, heart pounding. By the time I got home, I had the footage saved, backed up, and emailed to a contact at the EPA. Within an hour, I got a reply. Asterisk, "We appreciate your cooperation. Continue to document any suspicious activity." Asterisk. 2 days later, the first subpoenas arrived. Karen's picture-perfect world started to unravel. The HOA email system went down. Their website disappeared. Neighbors began receiving notices that the board was under temporary federal review. And then came the breaking point. It was Saturday morning when Karen showed up at my door. No warning. No phone call. Just her standing there, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her lips trembling with restrained fury. "Mr. Green," she said, voice cold and brittle. "You think you're clever, don't you?" I didn't answer. I just let the silence hang. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't know what kind of damage you're causing. This community depends on order. Without it, everything falls apart." "Order," I repeated. "You mean fear." Her jaw tightened. "You have no idea what I've done for this place." "You poisoned it," I said flatly. "And now you're trying to bury the evidence." For a split second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt, but panic. Then it was gone. She straightened. "You can't win this." "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about accountability." She turned on her heel and left without another word. That night, someone slashed my mailbox open. The metal was bent, the contents scattered. A warning, maybe, but I didn't scare easily. The next week was a blur of investigators, paperwork, and neighborhood rumors. The EPA had officially seized the HOA records, and a federal case number was assigned. Karen stopped attending public meetings altogether. But the board wasn't dead, not yet. Someone was still sending notices under the HOA's name and signed. New rules, new fines. I got one myself, $500 for an unauthorized security camera. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I checked the camera feed that night, I noticed something strange. Around midnight, a dark SUV parked at the end of my driveway. No headlights, engine idling. It stayed there for almost 20 minutes before driving off. The next night, it was back. I didn't sleep much after that. Whoever it was, they were watching. Then came the knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, just after midnight. I opened it a crack and saw 2 men in dark suits standing on the porch. "Mr. Green," one asked. "We're with the HOA Compliance Division." I raised an eyebrow. "There is no compliance division." He flashed a badge, cheap laminate, crooked text. "Fake. You need to come with us," the other said. "You're under investigation for interference with association operations." I almost laughed. Karen had finally lost it. "You two are trespassing," I said calmly. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my property before I call the real police." They hesitated, then turned and walked quickly back to their car. As they drove away, I caught a glimpse of the license plate, temporary tag, no registration. They weren't amateurs. Someone had arranged this carefully. The next morning, I filed a report. The sheriff's deputy came by, took my statement, and told me they'd patrol the area. But even he couldn't hide his disbelief when I explained that the HOA might have sent them. Still, I wasn't waiting around to see what happened next. That afternoon, I installed more cameras, high resolution, infrared, full coverage. I also called Paul. He didn't answer at first, but when he finally picked up, his voice was shaky. "I think she knows I talked to you," he whispered. "What happened?" "She's been calling me nonstop. Said she has friends who can take care of problems. I'm getting out of town for a few days." "Do that," I said, "and keep your phone on." After that, things moved quickly. The EPA agents came back, this time with more vehicles, more equipment. They sealed off the clubhouse, taped off sections of the lake, and interviewed homeowners. Neighbors whispered, some scared, some angry. The illusion of control that Karen had built for years was crumbling. But she wasn't done yet. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when I saw her again. She was standing by the edge of the lake, arms crossed, staring at the water. The sunset painted her face in streaks of orange and red. For a moment, she looked almost human, tired, defeated. Then she turned, saw me watching, and smiled. Not the smug, superior smile I was used to. This one was different, cold, knowing. She lifted her phone, aimed it toward me, and clicked a photo before walking away. Something told me this wasn't over. And deep down, I knew she still had cards left to play. The following days felt like walking on a tightrope. The neighborhood was silent, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums before a storm. Every car door, every phone buzz, every shadow near the lake set my nerves on edge. Karen had vanished. Her house sat dark, curtains drawn, mailbox overflowing. Rumors spread that she'd been questioned by the EPA for hours, that her lawyer had quit mid-meeting. Others claimed she'd fled the state. I didn't believe any of it. Karen wasn't the kind of person who ran. She was the kind who plotted. One night, around midnight, my motion cameras picked up movement. A figure near the lake, flashlight beam darting across the water. I zoomed in on the feed, Karen. I grabbed my jacket and slipped outside, staying low behind the hedges. She was at the shoreline, knee-deep in the mud, tossing something into the water. Papers, maybe. I could see the glint of plastic folders catching the moonlight before they sank beneath the surface. I started recording again. When I finally stepped into the open, she froze. "Couldn't sleep either?" I said, keeping my voice even. She straightened, her clothes soaked, face pale under the porch lights. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed. "Neither should you." I took another step forward. "What are you trying to hide this time?" She looked down at the rippling water. "You think you've won, don't you?" she whispered. "This isn't a game, Karen. You poisoned the lake. You lied to everyone. You broke the law." Her laugh was soft and brittle. "You think the law fixes everything? They'll investigate, fine us, and move on. But I'll still be here. People forget. They always do. Not this time." She stared at me for a long moment, eyes hollow but defiant. Then she walked past me, muttering something under her breath. I watched her car's taillights fade into the darkness until there was nothing left but the sound of frogs returning to the shore. By morning, The lake looked calm again, but I knew better. The EPA showed up later that day with dredging equipment and divers. They pulled out dozens of waterproof folders from the lakebed, contracts, invoices, emails. Every piece of evidence she'd tried to destroy. When they thanked me for my cooperation, I just nodded. There wasn't much else to say. A week later, an official notice arrived in every mailbox. HOA board suspended pending federal investigation. The association's accounts were frozen. Karen's name was listed as the primary respondent. That same evening, I saw 2 black SUVs pull up to her house. The agents walked her out in handcuffs. She didn't fight, didn't shout. She just looked straight ahead, face blank, lips pressed tight. Some neighbors stood at their doors, watching silently. For once, she didn't have an audience to command. The next few months were slow, quiet, almost eerie. The EPA's cleanup team worked through the spring, filtering the water, replacing soil, restoring what they could. It wasn't perfect, but the frogs came back, then the fish, and by summer, the lake reflected the sky again. Neighbors began to talk to each other more. Without Karen's rulebook dictating every flowerbed and mailbox color, people started helping one another, sharing tools, planting gardens, rebuilding fences. It was like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. One afternoon, Paul came by with a cup of coffee. He looked tired but lighter somehow. "They offered me a deal," he said. "Cooperation in exchange for testimony." I told them everything. Every payment, every fake contract. Turns out she'd been moving HOA funds through shell companies for almost 4 years. I nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." He looked out toward the lake. "You know, I thought this place was supposed to be peaceful. That's why I moved here. I didn't realize peace means standing up for it sometimes." For a while, neither of us said anything. The wind rippled the water, sunlight dancing on the surface. That night, I stood on the dock again. The smell of fresh air had returned. The kind of clean, crisp scent that reminded me of the first days I'd spent here years ago. I thought about my father, about the way he used to say that land has memory, that if you take care of it, it takes care of you. I looked down at the reflection in the water and saw it clearly for the first time in months. Then I noticed something else. Near the reeds, half buried in the mud, was a fragment of plastic, a piece of one of those waterproof folders. I picked it up. Inside, a single sheet of paper with Karen's handwriting. It was a letter. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then they've already taken everything. But remember this, the system doesn't punish the powerful, only the loud. Be careful what you expose. It has a way of turning back on you. Asterisk. The word sent a chill through me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not for what she'd done, but for how much she'd lost trying to control everything around her. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. A week later, the county announced that the HOA would be dissolved. Each homeowner would manage their own property until a new association could be formed. Few people seemed upset. It was like the whole town had woken from a long nightmare. When I walked through the neighborhood now, people smiled. Kids played by the lake again. And though the scars of what happened would never fully fade, the place finally felt alive. Sometimes I still think about Karen, where she ended up, what she thought when she saw the EPA trucks pulling into her driveway. Maybe she understood too late that power built on fear isn't power at all. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the dock with Scout beside me. The lake was still, perfectly still, and for the first time in months, it reflected not just the sky but something deeper, a kind of quiet justice. And I realized then, maybe peace doesn't come when the fight ends. Maybe it comes when the truth finally has nowhere left to hide.